All right, thank you, everybody. Again, welcome to this special meeting to review one of the last chapters in our SERP. I'm going to provide interpretation instructions in English and then in Spanish. Voy a proveer instrucciones de interpretación, primero en inglés y enseguida en español. ¿Pueden ver mi pantalla con las instrucciones? Can you all see my screen with the instructions? Okay, thank you. So if you're joining us through a tablet or smartphone, please locate the icon with the three dots. That's your menu. And then if you click there, you can see options there. Under that, you can click on language interpretation and then select English as your language. And if you are joining us through your computer or desktop, then you can locate the globe icon on the bottom of your screen. And from there, you can click it and select English as your language. I'm now going to provide these instructions in Spanish. Para todas las personas que nos acompañan a través de su tableta o de su teléfono inteligente o smartphone, favor de localizar el menú con los 3 puntos que está en la parte superior de su pantalla. Ahí pueden hacer clic o presionar ahí y de ahí pueden elegir la opción de Language Interpretation o interpretación del lenguaje. Y enseguida seleccionar Spanish o español como su lenguaje. Muy bien, esta opción de interpretación debe estar activada ya, así que por favor seleccionen su lenguaje, el lenguaje de su preferencia. Thank you, everybody. And so now I would like to just quickly go over our agenda for today. We are going to review our emissions inventory chapter. This is really one of the foundational chapters for our SERP here, because it will talk about what are the emissions that we are seeing in the community currently. So it provides us with a good baseline for everything else that we are set to do with the SERP. So for that, I have my colleagues here from CARB that I will turn the mic to in a bit for them to go over the presentation. After that, we will do public comments and then closing remarks. And hopefully we'll be finishing soon here, as we only have one item on our agenda, one main item on our agenda. But if anything else comes up, please feel free to bring it up, and we'd be happy to talk about it during the meeting. With that, before we get started, does anybody have any quick updates? I just want to share one quick update, but before then, I want to give folks an opportunity if anybody has any updates to share. If you do, please raise your hand or unmute yourself, and you can provide your update. All right, I don't see any hands raised. So just the brief update that I wanted to share was, I know that some members of the community who are official voting members of this committee there were some delays with your stipends, and I know that Chuy, our colleague Chuy from Estolano Advisors, who's helping us with that, with the distribution of the stipends, sent an email with some updates on your payments. And so if you haven't heard from Chuy, or if you didn't receive anything from Chuy, please let us know, and we'd be happy to follow up with Chuy and with you as well, just to make sure that everything is in order. And that is it for me for now. And so I will turn it over to our colleagues from CARB. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Sharanya.
Thank you, Domingo. Hey, everybody. Can you guys hear me well?
Yes,
okay,
thank
perfect,
you, Sharanya.
Perfect, yes. Thank you all for joining us today. And we are so glad to come back to you almost like a year later, I guess. We first started discussing emission inventory last year. So very happy to come back to you all and have another discussion so we can figure out how you can use this emissions information, as Domingo said, the foundational information, to come up with what strategies you want to put in your search. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my lead emission inventory staff here, Abhishek, and Jenny, who had presented to you guys last year. She recently got promoted to another position, but she's here because she's been doing this work for the longest time, and she's made these connections with the community and all of these. So between Abhishek and Jenny, they'll handle today's meeting. Well, thank you so much. Abhishek?
Thank you, Sharanya. So let's start, Jenny. So I will start with, so good evening, everyone. My name is Abhishek Dhiman, and I work for the California Resources Board in the Community Inventory Group. Today, we are going to go over a summary for the emission inventory SERP chapter you may have already reviewed. The chapter includes lots of additional information on pollutants and sources, which may be useful for your review when you have the time. But today, we are going to provide you an update to the emission inventory discussion we had last year. So many of these slides will already be familiar to you from a discussion last year. Also, I want it to be an interactive session, so I do encourage all of you to ask questions along the way, like stop me whenever. I will also like make some stops in the between so that you can ask questions. You can also drop questions anytime in the chat box, and my colleagues here will answer those questions. And next slide, Jenny. So the first question we are going to ask is, what is an emission inventory and why do we need it? So simply put, an emission inventory is an accounting of emissions from all sources of air pollution in the community. And it serves as a fundamental component of any air quality plan. CARB's Community Air Protection Blueprint calls for the use of emission inventories in community emission reduction programs, which are also called SERPs, to help identify emission sources in the community, establish a baseline of emissions, then set emission targets and reduction measures, and then we also do future forecasted emission inventories through which we can track emission reductions. Understanding emission sources and community concerns is the first critical step towards identifying strategies to reduce emissions. Next slide, Jenny. The final emission inventory for IBC accounts for emissions within the 1 kilometer grid community boundary shown in black. As you can see on the map on your screens right now, the 1 kilometer grid boundary reflects the full grid that expands the community boundary, which is shown in the pink polygon. The expanded portion includes Brownfield Municipal Airport on the northern part of Otay Mesa and some portions of Naval Outlying Field Imperial on the western part of San Isidro. Next slide, Jenny. An emission inventory estimates the amount of air pollutants discharged into the atmosphere by emission sources in a region and within a certain time period, like a calendar year. In this case, for IBC, we are looking at those emissions for the year of 2021 within the community boundary. Emission inventories are developed with the best data available and are updated over time to reflect sound science and robust new data. It is important to understand that emission inventories are developed with the best available data, and that the development process is continuous, iterative, and always in the state of improvement as science advances and more robust input data becomes available. There is an inherent uncertainty and limitation in emission inventories, whether they are based on self-reported emissions from the facilities that report to the district, or from estimates calculated using methodologies and other emission calculation models. Next slide, Jenny. So district and CARB staff have been working together to develop an emission inventory for the community to help understand existing sources of air pollution and where these occur in the community. Emission sources are divided into 4 major sources. The first one is stationary. So stationary sources are fixed sources of air pollution. For example, like all the power plants, gas station, manufacturing facilities, and auto body shops in the community would be examples of stationary sources. These are the sources that district oversees. Then the second one is area-wide sources. So area-wide sources are the sources that are spread over a wide geographical area. For example, consumer products like household cleaning products and hairsprays, paint cleanup, and thinning solvents, coating supplied to building structures or houses, fireplaces, and farming operations would be some of the examples of area-wide sources. Both district and CARB work together to calculate emissions for these categories. The third one is on-road mobile sources. So on-road mobile sources include any motor vehicle that is operating on the roadways, like your passenger cars, trucks, buses, and motorcycles. And finally, off-road mobile sources include small off-road engines and equipment, farm equipment, construction equipments, aeroplanes, and trains. CARB works on CARB oversees work for all the inventory development for both on-road mobile and off-road mobile sources. Next slide, Jenny. Pollutants. Criteria pollutants are the 6 pollutants for which US EPA has set national ambient air quality standards, NAAQS in short, under the Clean Air Act. These pollutants are ozone, particulate matter, which is also called PM, sulfur dioxide, which is also abbreviated as SO2, nitrogen dioxide, which is abbreviated as NO2, carbon monoxide, which is abbreviated as CO, and lead, which is abbreviated as PB. While most criteria pollutants are directly emitted by sources, some are formed because of complex chemical reactions within the atmosphere. As an example, ozone is not directly emitted into the air, but is created by chemical reactions between oxides of nitrogen that are also called abbreviated as NOx or called as NOx, and volatile organic compounds and are also called VOC in short. Additionally, PM is both directly emitted and formed through chemical reactions. Pollutants that react to form criteria pollutants are called precursor pollutants or simply precursors. CARB also identifies other air pollutants as toxic air contaminants, or TACs in short, which are pollutants that may cause serious long-term effects such as cancer, even at low levels. Most air toxics have no known safe levels, and some may accumulate in the body from repeated exposures. CARB lists over 1,400 substances that are subject to reporting as air toxics. Measures continue to be adopted to reduce emissions of air toxics by both the air district and the CARB. Next slide, Jenny. So the district and CARB jointly developed the community level emission inventories using reported emission data from permitted facilities and best available methodologies and models for area-wide, such as gas stations, fugitive dust, and outdoor cooking, and mobile sources such as cars, trucks, and off-road equipment within the IBC community. The emission inventory includes estimated emissions for criteria air pollutants such as directly emitted PM and NOx, and their precursors such as reactive organic gases and toxic air contaminants such as diesel PM. The SERP uses inventory base year and future years consistent with CARB guidance on inventory year selection for the AB 617 communities. The base year inventory 2021 presents an accounting of emissions in a recent year and forms the basis of all future year projections, and also establishes the emission levels against which progress in emission reductions will be measured. In addition to a base year inventory, CARB's AB 617 blueprint also requires future future year inventory projections for specific milestone years during SERP implementation, specifically 5th and 10th year after the SERP is adopted by the district governing board. Assuming the SERP is adopted by the district in 2024, the future years for inventory development are 2029 and 2034. Forecasted inventories are a projection of the base year inventory that reflects expected growth trends for each source category and emission reductions due to already adopted control measures. Next slide, Jenny. This table on this slide shows the total emissions for each pollutant and source category within the 1 kilometer graded community boundary. You can see that mobile sources, especially off-road mobile, are the primary contributors to NOx and diesel PM emissions, while stationary and area-wide sources contribute to ROG and PM 2.5 emissions. In the following slides, I will share more information about each of these source categories. Next slide, Jenny. As for stationary sources, district collects and submit facility or point emissions to CARB's emission inventory reporting system for permitted sources. However, there are some small facilities such as mom and pop gas stations and dry cleaners that are not inventoried individually, but are instead estimated as a group. CARB helps the district estimate emissions from those small facilities, also known as stationary aggregate sources. Together, emissions from both point sources and stationary aggregate represent the stationary sources. Next slide, Jenny. This slide shows the stationary source emissions in the community. As you can see, fuel combustion related sources contribute largely to the NOx PM 2.5, which is particulate matter that is either 2.5 microns or smaller, and diesel particulate matter emissions. Coating and related process solvents that are used in auto body shops or are used for auto refinishing account for 38% of the ROG emissions within the community, followed with the adhesives and sealants and petroleum marketing, which are also which can also be called gas stations. And the map here shows stationary source ROG emissions that are distributed within the community. Highest ROG emissions from stationary source, shown in the dark colored grids, are located around in the industrial areas adjacent to major roads in Otay Mesa and parts of San Isidro that are adjacent to large freeways. I'll pause for a moment here and see if anyone has any questions.
Hi, this is Jenny Quintana.
Yes.
I had a quick question. Do you think this was very typical, given that it might have been impacted by COVID, or do you feel like it was pretty much back to normal at that point?
Jenny, can you answer that?
Yeah, our data, our emission inventory data didn't really account the impact of COVID. So, yeah. So it's just a normal reporting, at least I think for the district, but for the modeling, model emission inventory for emissions for area and model and mobile sources, we didn't account for that.
No, I was just curious whether you had any data that there was any differences. For example, I think the border volume of trucks crossing the border at Otay was pretty much the same as before COVID, but I think San Isidro might have been a little lower. Anyway, I was just curious, but I didn't mean to derail the really great presentation. Thank you.
That was a great question, actually. Shara, do you know if CARB has someone, like, at least for the mobile sources, like collected data for, I mean, impact for COVID? I can't remember,
Yeah,
Ben.
thank you, Jenny. Yeah, thank you, Jenny and Abhishek, and thank you, Jenny, you for the question. So we did this inventory is definitely an overestimate. Like we didn't account for any COVID impacts in any of our inventory source categories, right? So this is like I think a good way to look at emissions because you're not saying that because COVID had some temporary shutdown, some of those emissions changed. We do not have any adjustments for mobile sources. That was some discussion that we had last year, and I know Domingo, you had brought in the SANDAG folks to talk about it, and they were going to look at it. But I don't think any of us have that information at this point to make that clear distinction between how the border crossing was affected by the COVID. So, Domingo, do you have anything to add related to what SANDAG might have mentioned to you?
No, and what I'm actually trying to see if there's anybody from SANDAG with us today. I don't think I see anybody from SANDAG today, but we can certainly check in with them to see if there's any information that they might be able to share with us.
Thank you, Domingo. Did that answer your question, Jenny?
Yes, sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anybody else? I don't see any hands up, but you also all have the ability to unmute if you want to ask any questions. I think we're good to continue.
Okay.
Thanks.
Jenny, next slide. So the next source is area-wide. So for area-wide sources, both CARB and district calculate emissions using approved methodologies for each category at the county level. These sources include consumer products, fugitive dust from construction, and residential fuel combustion. As an example, residential fuel combustion includes the use of fireplaces and water heaters at home. If you are interested in reading more about these methodologies, please visit the website below for more information. Next slide, Jenny. This slide shows the area-wide source categories contributing to each pollutant emissions in the community. Residential fuel combustion contributes most of the NOx emissions for area-wide sources. Fugitive dust from construction and demolition and paved road sources contribute largely towards PM 2.5 emissions. Lastly, emissions from consumer products contribute more than half of the ROG emissions, followed by architectural coatings and process solvents like cleaning solution and asphalt paving. The map here shows the distribution of area-wide ROG emissions in the community. Dark colored grids or high ROG emissions follow along the residential areas in San Isidro due to emissions from emission products, and industrial areas in Otay Mesa, which could be associated from coatings and degreasing solutions. One important note I want to emphasize here is that some of our area source methodologies to estimate emissions are outdated and use older input data. Especially PM emissions related to construction dust might be overestimated for the community. CARB is planning to update several area source methodologies in the coming year to reflect current and most up-to-date activity data. Fugitive dust emissions are one of those planned updates, and when that is done, CARB will be able to provide an updated inventory for this category during SERP implementation. I will pause for a moment to see if there are any questions regarding to area-wide sources. No questions? Let's move forward. So next slide, Jenny. Our next category is off-road sources. So CARB calculates emissions for off-road using approved methodologies, using the latest activity data and latest emission factors. Activity data is collected from reported information, survey results, and purchase data. CARB's methodologies for off-road can be found in the link that has been provided on the slide. Next slide, Jenny. Now we will look at off-road results. So this slide shows the off-road mobile source categories contributing to each pollutant emissions in the community. Aircraft-related emissions, which includes those from the brownfield airport, and off-road equipment sources contribute the highest NOx, ROG, and PM2.5 emissions. Off-road equipment such as construction equipment, lawn and garden equipment, and registered portable equipment contribute most of the DPM emissions in the IBC community. The map here shows the off-road mobile DPM emissions and how they are distributed in the community. As you can see from the map, the DPM emissions are heavily concentrated in areas adjacent to major roads, the 905 and 905 freeway, 125 freeway, and I-5 and 805 freeway. From the northern portion to the border crossings, both in San Isidro and Otay Mesa. I'll pause for a moment to see if there are any questions on off-road. No questions. Next slide, Jenny. Our last category is on-road mobile sources, which includes cars, trucks, buses, and other vehicles we see traveling on our roads. We estimate these emissions using the road vehicle activity data from the regional metropolitan planning organization, which in this case would be SANDAG, that is San Diego Association of Governments. And vehicle type distribution and emission factors are taken from CARB's latest on-road emission model, which is called MFAC 2021. Next slide, Jenny. As you can see from the results on these slides, light duty vehicles like passenger cars that you and me typically drive contribute to the most NOx, ROG, and PM2.5 emissions within the IBC community. Altogether, heavy duty vehicles such as heavy, light heavy, and medium heavy duty trucks and buses contribute to the majority of DPM emissions in the community. As we all expected and was also brought up in the meeting last year, the highest on-road mobile DPM emission distinctly follows the major freeways within the IBC communities that are like 805 freeway in San Isidro, 905 and 125 freeways in Otay Mesa, where trucks moving goods pass through in and out of the border crossings. I will pause for a moment here to see if there are any questions on on-road sources.
Hi, this is Jenny Quintana again.
Yes.
Sorry.
Hi, Jenny.
I just can't read the. Can you point out where the Otay Mesa crossing is? Sorry.
It should be around here. Like Jenny, can you point to it?
It just seems like it's.
Oh,
Right.
it's this one. This is the crossing, right? This is the 905.
That's the 905, and then the
Yeah,
small
this-
road that goes below all the way to the borderline. Yes,
Yeah.
that's the border crossing right there. It's the last darkest blue square.
Hmm.
Yes, right there.
I guess my question is, this did not count trucks queuing up on the Mexican side, right? In terms of local emissions, just on the US side.
That is true.
Okay.
So we only accounted for the US side, but there are contracts in place, like from our modeling folks and within AQPST that are looking into looking into emissions from the border side. And like once we have that information, I think we can share it with you guys. And also, Sharanya, if you want to add something, like feel free to.
Yeah, no, thank you, Abhishek. You covered that. So, Jenny, what the contract that Abhishek was talking about is not related to the AB 617 work that we're doing, but it's mostly for the regional air quality for the state implementation plan. So, I know that there are folks from the district. Domingo, you've been working with the Mexican side of authorities there, and CARB is also working with them to kind of have them update their emissions inventory. So that's been one of the things that we've been focusing on doing. So I think, when all that comes to fruition, maybe there will be a little bit more explanation on what's really happening at the border crossing. In the meantime, I think, I know we had talked about this with SANDAC folks too. Of course, they're not going to be able to do emissions, but, if there is any way that SANDAC can be involved to look at, what's happening and how measures can be added to help alleviate some of those congestion that's happening over there, that could be a great step forward. Domingo?
Yes, thank you, Sharanya. Just one quick comment. I actually just had a meeting today with the EPA border office staff just to check in on this precise point. And they were gonna get back to me to see where things were at with that, because there were conversations about having emission inventories from all border states, so all across the border, the US-Mexico border. And so I'm hoping to get more information on that soon that I'd be happy to share with CARB staff and with everybody here.
Anyone else has any questions?
Hi, this is Han Yang from SDSU. I have a clarification question. Can you, in the previous slides, you mentioned that in this estimation of on-road mobile emissions, you consider the influence of temperature and humidity. So I wonder if you consider that for the other source emissions.
I don't think we considered it for the area wide and off-road. Like if it is baked into the methodology, then we would have considered the effect of temperature and everything. But like for specific, I think we do actually the MFAC model, which we derive the emission factors for, that actually takes into account the effect of relative humidity and temperatures.
Or what is the rationale or motivation to consider temperature and humidity for on-road emissions?
Temperature. I think it really depends, right? Like if you are looking at evaporative emissions, if the temperatures are more like more is going to be evaporated. And also like if the temperatures are high, you are going to burn more fuel. That is my understanding. But if like Sharanya, if you have more information on it, and if Jenny, feel free to add.
Yeah, no, you got it right, Abhishek. So for on-road sources, depending on whether you have a hot start or a cold start, right? A hot start is like if a vehicle has been running for a long time when the engine is already primed up, so your emissions are much lower than when you're starting your vehicle on a cold morning first, right? So those things affect the engine functioning and the emissions that come out of it. So those are the reasons why those are considered and the on-road emission estimates baked into the emission factor calculations. For the area-wide sources, we don't specifically, as Abhishek said, if the methodology has something that we need to look at in terms of relative humidity or temperature, then it's already included. We've only just starting to look at area sources in greater detail. In the next couple of years, we'll be looking more into it. But that said, I do want to emphasize that for dust emissions and things like that, paved road dust that is coming, that entering dust that kicks up when vehicles are traveling on road, or dust that's getting blown up by the wind, those kind of things, we do account for the temporal variations, right? It's not going to be like every day, but monthly, like, during rainy season, we have some adjustment factors because it's raining and then maybe the dust is suppressed a little bit. So there's a little bit of temporal adjustments that we do for some of those categories, but really the emissions in themselves are not affected when you're talking about like dust emissions, right? Maybe wind speed is the one that is more of a factor there. So the methodology might include that on really windy days, how you go about doing it. So yeah, so I think in general, on-road sources, industrial sources, stack temperatures matter when emissions are coming out of your industrial sources, right? So how high the stack, the plume is getting, going up in the air, and how much longer it will take for it to fall down, and things like that. So with that, I think anybody else has any other questions, or did I answer your question, Lee?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. If not, Abhishek, you can continue.
Next slide, Jenny. So like in the previous slides, we were looking at the results, the emission results within IBC for like from a individual source category standpoint. Now we will look at all the sources together. So these are the pie charts that show like all the sources together, so that like you can get a sense of like in the bigger scheme of things, like how like which sources dominate. So for mobile sources, both on-road and off-road account for around 87% of the total NOx emissions within the IBC community. Like of those, like emissions from like also like emissions from aircrafts, off-road equipment, light-duty vehicles, and fuel combustion are like fuel combustion mostly from the stationary sources are significant sources of NOx emissions within the community. ROG emissions in the community, which are shown on the right in the pie chart, are dominated by emissions from stationary and area-wide sources. So stationary accounting for 29% and area-wide accounting for 33%. Within that, like solvent evaporation from consumer products, some examples of solvent evaporation from consumer products would be household sprays, which we use, personal care products, and barbecue light fluid. Contribute to around 21% of the total emissions, total ROG emissions, while solvent evaporations from industrial or commercial activities like cleaning and surface coatings, adhesive and sealants, degreasing, printing, architectural coatings, and asphalt paving and roofing contribute to around 31% of the total emissions within the IBC. 31% of the total ROG emissions that are happening within the IBC community. Passenger cars, like other major sources would be passenger cars, off-road equipment, examples of off-road equipment would be lawnmowers, construction equipment, generators, like those sources would be the largest contributor of ROG, and though like are the largest contributor of ROG within the IBC community. Next slide, Jenny. That, yeah. Like last slide, like here we are showing like charts for PM10 and PM2.5 emissions. The largest sources of directly emitted PM10 emissions in the community is from construction and demolition activities and entrained paved road dust. Like that makes up around 92% of the total emissions, total PM10 emissions happening within the community. So it's pretty significant. Construction and demolition activities also contribute to half of the directly emitted PM2.5 emissions in the community. Emissions from, like apart from that, like emission from paved road dust, fuel combustion at the stationary sources, commercial cooking, like charboiling, deep fat frying are some of the other major sources of directly emitted PM2.5 within the community. Next slide, Jenny. So I will stop here for some time. So like if you have any questions on the total emission breakdown within the IBC community for these pollutants, you can ask them. So yes, so let's move forward as there are no questions. Can you guys hear me though? Okay.
Yep.
Because I think I'm going slow, like I have cough, so it's hard.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Domingo. So this slide shows the 2021 toxic air contaminants, also called TAX in short, for the IBC community. To relatively compare toxic emissions, we have calculated toxicity weighted emissions, which are also called TWEs, using approved health values. Please note that TWEs are not risks, but weighted emissions, useful to rank, like if you want to relatively do a relative ranking of toxicity of all the toxics based on their toxicity. So the TWEs are really helpful to do that. The charts here show the toxicity of TAX for all sources in the community based on cancer risk weighted emissions, which is the left chart. Chronic non-cancer risk weighted emissions, which is the upper right chart, and acute non-cancer risk weighted emissions, that is the bottom right chart. As we can see, diesel PM has the highest cancer risk weighted emissions, and of which like 84% is coming from off-road mobile sources, and the rest and the second major contributor would be on-road sources. So like mobile sources make up most of the diesel PM emissions within the IBC community. So the second highest contributor to the cancer risk is cobalt, which is mainly associated with fugitive dust emissions from construction activities and paved road. For the non-cancer risks, which are shown on the right, metals like nickel and manganese dominate, which are also mainly associated with fugitive dust emissions from construction activities and paved road. Here I want to caveat that our current emission calculation methods and data used for estimating fugitive dust PM emissions from construction and associated toxics are outdated. As I have noted before, CARB is planning to update several area source methodologies in the coming year to reflect current science and up-to-date activity data. Fugitive dust emissions are one of those planned updates, and when that is done, CARB will be able to provide an updated inventory for this category during the SERP implementation. So I'll pause for a moment here if anybody has any questions on toxics.
Sorry, so where does the cobalt come from? If it's cobalt, I can't quite read it very well, sorry.
Construction and demolition. So it comes from the construction and demolition activities. So like, and also like the entrained paved. So like when your vehicles move on the road, on the paved road, like due to the friction, like it entrains dust into the air, and that is the source for the cobalt.
Yeah, it's mostly coming from the dust, Jenny.
Yeah.
From road dust, you mean? Or just
Yes.
dust?
Road dust, and then construction dust from the constructions.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff.
So the thing is, Jenny, that like so we are in the process of updating our area source methodologies, right? So, and one of the most outdated methodologies which we have are under area wide sources is construction and demolition and paved road dust. And so how we estimate toxic, so we take the PM, total PM, which has been estimated by all these old methodologies, which might be overestimating PM for all these categories. So we take that PM and then like we speciate it using our speciation profiles, and probably those speciation profiles for those categories are also based on the old data. So So that's the thing which we are going to improve on. So first we are going to improve on the area source methodologies for these categories, and hopefully we'll see a decline in the emission numbers for the PM first, PM 2.5 and PM 10 in general. And due to that, we will see a decrease in the cobalt emissions. So but because these methodologies are so outdated and they have not been updated in a while, I think we are overestimating like PM emissions from these sources, and because we are overestimating PM emissions, we are also overestimating cobalt emissions.
I had one last question. I'm sorry.
Mhm. But did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm related to dust. I apologize if you mentioned this already, but did you look at the like Border Patrol ATVs and stuff generating dust right along the border there in your emission? I think you
No,
that came up before, but
no, like we do not really and I don't think like even AMFAC takes into consideration like Border Patrol vehicles in their inventory, because I think it's a federal thing. I'm not sure, but like Sharanya, if you want to add, like, please.
Yeah. So Jenny, I know you had raised this question, and I thought we had provided a response to a written response, which might be posted on the district website or shared with you. But just as a refresher, we do account for Border Patrol off-road vehicles like ATVs and things, but this car's inventory is not as resolved to know which vehicles are operating at where. So the regulations are collect information statewide, and then the inventory is done at that level. But we talked to our mobile source folks, and they said it's impossible for them to resolve it to how many vehicles are operating at the San Diego community versus something else that's operating somewhere else, a federal facility. So the emissions are reported, the vehicles are reported, but it's impossible to kind of attribute and say that these are all the Border Patrol vehicles that are operating in San Diego, in particular within the IBC community, and these are the emissions associated with it. So there is a lack of information there because the regulation only asks for reporting on vehicles at a much larger scale, right? And also the regulations do not ask for specific emission factors and things like that either. So general tier information is used to estimate those emissions. So unless and until I think there is a specific focus study to look at these emissions, working with the federal government, I'm not too sure if they will have that kind of resolution in the off-road inventory, especially with the ATVs.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Definitely could be something that you can consider as part of the third strategy, working with Domingo to see if there is something that we can all do together.
Are there any more questions on the toxics? Okay, Jenny, next slide. This slide shows 4 maps. So these 4 maps show the added 2021 total emissions for all the source categories that are stationary, area-wide, on-road mobile, and off-road mobile for each 1K grid in the community. From these maps, we can get a sense of how NOx, ROG, PM10, and PM 2.5 total emissions are distributed throughout the community. The dark colored grids with higher emissions are often concentrated in locations on or near major roadways, that is 905, 805, and I-5. And like it's also concentrated around like some of the major industrial sites and border crossings. Next slide, Jenny. Like last slide, the map here shows geographical distribution of total DPM base year emissions in the community. Diesel PM emissions from off-road and on-road sources align with the main transportation corridors and areas of off-road vehicle and equipment activity. So you can see, like Jenny, you can like point towards the roads, like where the darker grids are. So I will pause at this slide to see like if there are any questions. No questions. So Jenny, next slide. As required by the blueprint, we have also developed projected future emissions. As a start, this slide shows the emission trends for the IBC community, so we can get a general idea of how emission totals are projected to change due to the economic growth and already adopted CARB and district rules and regulations. And the chart here shows the total base year 2021 and forecasted future years 2029 and 2034 emission inventories for the community. As described earlier, future emissions of criteria, pollutants, and tax in the community are forecasted using the best available information, representing projected future activity data, population, and economic growth. And emission control related data from the implementation of existing San Diego Air Pollution Control District and CARB regulations. The baseline projections do not take into effect the impact from the regulations that are currently being developed or considered as an emission reduction strategy in the SERB. Next slide, Jenny. San Diego Air Pollution Control District has several rules which control both criteria and TAC emissions from facilities operating in the community. Stationary source emissions are relatively small and remain unchanged due to existing district regulations. ROG and PM emission trends are slightly increasing, specifically from area-wide sources, likely due to future growth assumptions. For example, increasing population that increase the use of personal products and other consumer products relating to coatings and cleaning solvents for ROG, and fugitive dust related to increase in construction activities from new residential and commercial buildings, and like construction and the construction that is happening close to the roads or on the roads for PM. CARB's implementation of several adopted mobile regulations for both on-road and off-road sources continue to reduce TPM, NOx, ROG, and other air pollutant emissions in the community. Even while the PM emissions from mobile source continue to decrease, total PM10 and PM2.5 emissions show a slight increase during this period, primarily due to other sources of these emissions, such as construction and demolition activities, which are not regulated. Emissions from mobile sources show significant decrease from many already adopted CARB regulations, like the truck and bus rule and advanced clean cars regulations that have already been adopted by the CARB board. Additionally, CARB has several mobile source regulations in the works that will further decrease mobile source related NOx, ROG, PM2.5, and diesel PM emissions in the IBC community. Next slide, Jenny. The projected trend for TAC emissions is presented in this slide using the same cancer risk toxicity weighted emissions approach discussed earlier in the base year inventory. The contribution of diesel PM emissions to the total toxics emission in the community significantly decreases through 2034 due to existing diesel vehicle emission regulations and turnover from older, higher polluting vehicles to cleaner vehicles due as an artifact of all these regulations. Similarly, other mobile source related tax such as benzene and 1,3-butadiene also show a slight decrease. However, emissions of some heavy metals such as cobalt from construction and demolition activities show a projected increase during this period, mainly because of the growth assumption used to project future construction activities in the region. And it is purely a calculated estimate based on the assumptions and equations that we are using for the forecast. It is important to note that toxic emissions data and analysis presented in this section is an exercise in evaluating total TAC emissions in the community. This is not a localized health risk assessment, which takes into account specific emission source parameters, that is temperature, stack height, distance from nearby receptors, and the proximity and the types of receptors around the facility, and also local meteorological conditions. So I will pause here. So for any questions.
I have a quick question on the previous slide, on slide 23. As we were looking at these graphs, I'm looking at just comparing stationary sources with on-road mobile sources, on-road and off-road. I was a little bit surprised of looking at the level of on-road mobile sources, just given the truck and vehicle traffic that's generated by the border crossing. Any insights on this particular point here? Because I see that, for example, stationary sources are, well, at least I'm looking at the orange bar. I'm trying to figure out what that orange is.
Orange is, Jenny, can you remove the, no, go back and click on the.
Yes, the orange bar is the ROG one, Domingo.
Yes.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it might be mostly coming from consumer products. Yes. Or
and then, because even looking at NOx and PM, it seems like stationary sources are higher emitters.
Yeah, so to answer that question,
just curious.
Yeah, so I can answer that question for you, Domingo. So it's because of all of the, we have so many regulations. CARB has been regulating mobile sources for a long time that we're trying to clean them up quite a bit. So our existing regulations, especially moving to cleaner vehicles as well as cleaner fuel and electric vehicles, it's going to bring down these emissions significantly, right? Our diesel PM emissions are significantly decreased from all of the heavy-duty trucks and everything that goes between the border crossing. Our light-duty vehicles are getting cleaned up because of advanced clean car regulations. So all of these are really resulting in a cleaner vehicle, right? So we've had years of regulatory authority on mobile sources, so those things are getting cleaned up quite a bit. That's not to say that there is still that idling concern at the border, which we are not capturing in any of these, right? So when vehicles are sitting there and putting out the emissions, but in general, the adopted regulations that we have for our on-road sector have significantly reduced diesel PM emissions to date and will continue to reduce diesel PM emissions and other combustion-related solutions, right, from on-road vehicles. And as we move more into with the advanced clean car regulations and move into electric vehicles, a lot of the combustion-related emissions will significantly decrease. That's not to say that the non-combustion parts will then go up, right? So we have the brake wear and tire wear and other things to worry about at that point in terms of PM.
Right. And again, this is not taking into account idling emissions from across the border, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yes. So we don't account for that in any of our, because ours is the state of California model, so everything is within California. So.
Right. Thank you, Sharanya.
Good. Thank you, Domingo.
Any more questions? Next slide, Jenny. Next slide. Okay. So I think this, I'll just conclude this inventory presentation by providing a summary of what we discussed. So in summary, the district and CARB have together developed a baseline emission inventory for the IBC community. The baseline emissions inventory developed based on existing emissions and their future projections provide information on the current level of emissions and how the emissions change in the future in a business as usual scenario. In other words, where the community is starting their journey towards the clean air. Additionally, it provides a reference to determine emission reductions from actions and strategies included in the SERP. In other words, assist the district and the CSC to know if progress is being made to reduce pollution in the community, and if so, how much pollution is being reduced. For the IBC community, mobile sources, especially off-road mobile, contribute most of NOx and DPM emissions. Emissions of DPM and other mobile sources related toxics, for example, 1,3-butadiene, are expected to decrease in the future due to existing diesel vehicle emission regulations, and also like changing of old fleets to newer fleets. Area-wide sources, specifically fugitive dust from construction activities, contribute most of the PM emissions and its speciated heavy metal toxics. Consumer products, gas stations, and mobile sources contribute to ROG emissions. Mostly contribute to the ROG emissions. The spatial maps show higher emissions in areas adjacent to major road corridors, that is close to the or close to 905 and 805 freeway, and also on I-5. All spatial maps also show higher emissions in like major industrial sites and border crossings. Lastly, forecasted emissions in the community are projected to decline in future years from several already adopted district and CARB regulations. Additional reductions from mobile sources will continue to occur in all of California communities from the many statewide proposed CARB regulations that are currently being developed. And so with this, we end our presentation, and I'll open the floor for more questions.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. Anybody have any comments or questions on what you heard today? Anything that stood out to you that you'd like to share? I know it's a lot of information, but we will have this presentation also posted on our website, and we'll have the translation into Spanish of all the chapter. I know the presentation is translated, but the chapter itself will also be translated into Spanish, and we should have that available next week as well.
Domingo, so Jenny, can you go to the next slide, please? So we forgot
Yes.
to
No, thank you. This is great. I was just gonna ask.
We forgot to thank like whoever helped us make this presentation possible and all the inventory work. So the first name is me, and then like a special thanks to Jenny and Victoria for providing all the ancillary work, like which helped us like make this presentation, like the data, which really helped. And like finally, we like a big thanks to Sharanya, who leads us well and wants the best for people in all these communities.
Absolutely. A lot of work has gone into this, so we really appreciate all the time and effort that was put into not just the presentation today, but all the work that goes behind everything that you presented today. So thank you very much to all of you for that.
Thank you for having us, Domingo.
All right. Any general comments or questions? All right, I'm hearing none.
Gracias por todo, fue
Oh.
una excelente presentación y todo muy claro.
Gracias, muchas gracias.
I did put
all
a
right.
question in the chat, Domingo, sorry.
Quiero comentar
Yes.
bien, toda la información que nos han dado, de verdad que es un gran trabajo y esfuerzo el que se ha estado realizando. Es una labor muy extensa, es muchísima información y para que ustedes la tengan aquí elaborada y para que nos la tengan en un resumen, pero todo el trabajo que hay detrás. Y para San Isidro, pues se los agradecemos de todo corazón. Muchísimas gracias por ese esfuerzo y por haber puesto los ojos aquí donde de verdad los necesitamos. Gracias.
No, al contrario, muchas gracias por su participación y por mantenerse al tanto de todo lo que está sucediendo y de todos los comentarios que nos han dado a lo largo de este proceso. All right. So let me go ahead and share my screen just to place us back on the agenda and just the table of contents for our SERP here. All right, can everybody see my screen okay? Right. So as you can see here, all of the information that's highlighted in green are all of the different chapters that we've reviewed already, our grounding chapter, our background with the public outreach and engagement that we've done, our community identified priorities. And today we reviewed the emissions inventory data, we reviewed the air monitoring data, we've gone through all of the strategies as well as the enforcement plan. One more item that I wanted to touch just briefly today on is the CEQA chapter. And what this is, CEQA stands for California Environmental Quality Act. And this chapter basically is a determination from our agency, from the San Diego APCD, of how this document conforms with the CEQA law in California, or how it might be exempt from any of the provisions of CEQA. So this is it's a relatively brief chapter. It's only a page and a half, and it just goes over background on what CEQA is, what that law entails, what the requirements are for that law, what we're looking for in our SERP as a whole, to make sure that we either conform to the law or that we're exempt from it. In this case, our attorney took a look at it, and they determined that this document is exempt from CEQA, as you know, it's not. We don't foresee that there will be any negative impacts from this document to the environment. There's a number of projects in here that, on an individual basis, might be subject to CEQA, specifically those that have to do with you know, highway improvements or things like that, but those have to be evaluated separately on their own as those particular projects are being worked on. But our document as a whole is exempt from CEQA. So that's just a determination that APCD as an agency has to make. And then our board, when we present this document for our board to approve, then they will have to approve that determination as well. So this really completes all of our you know, chapter by chapter review of our document. So it's a very important milestone, and I just wanted to acknowledge that and to thank all of our CSE members, any other member of the public who's joining us, and all of our partner agencies that have worked together very hard to put this document together. All of us, it's really an important accomplishment. I personally feel very proud and very excited about this document, not just because of all the work that we put into it, but what's going to mean in the future for the community, as you know, as we start implementing it. I wanted to just briefly take a look at our timeline here. Right now, we are in the final revision of the SERP. In our meeting next in a couple of weeks, we're going to review the whole document just as a whole. We're going to do a brief, like a summary review of the entire document, and we will be proposing it for your approval. And then I'm sorry, in November we'll do the revision. In December we'll be proposing it for your approval so that you can all take a vote to approve it potentially on the 13th of December. Then in January, we're hoping to take the approved document from all of you to our governing board for their approval, so that then we can submit it to the California Air Resources Board for their final approval. And then we'll kickstart officially the implementation of our SERP. There's a number of strategies where, fortunately, we've been already doing some progress, and there's a lot more work that is awaiting. So very excited about the next steps. And just before we close, I wanted to mention for our next meeting, again, it will be a full review of the entire draft of the SERP. We will be publishing the document beforehand, both in English and in Spanish, so that anybody that has any last comments or questions on it can definitely still make those, and we can discuss those in our meeting later this month. And so, as you know, we've been trying to meet in person on a quarterly basis. So our meeting in November is technically due to be in person. However, since we will be reviewing the entire document and we want to make sure that we have the highest attendance that we can for this important piece, we are hoping to have our meeting be virtual if you all are okay with that option. This will facilitate a couple of things. One, we will have to share our screen a lot to just walk through the document and go over the document, so that it might be easier to do it via Zoom. The other thing is, again, trying to have this meeting accessible, to reach more people to be able to connect to our meeting. And then finally, we are also hoping to have some folks from the EPA come and join us, and they would be hoping to connect remotely to provide an update on some of the latest work that is being planned, and it's taking place with the Tijuana River sewage issue and the work that the water treatment plants are embarking on. So I think we think this is an important update that all of you have shown a lot of interest in, and so we were hoping to have staff from EPA be able to connect remotely to provide that update as well. And so if anybody has unless anybody has any objections or any concerns with us having our meeting virtually, we will go ahead and have it virtually instead of in person. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns with us moving forward in this way? If you can unmute yourself and share or put a comment on the chat, or maybe raise your hand. I'm seeing folks are okay with Zoom. Thank you, Olga. All right. Thank you, Jenny. I see thumbs up as well. All right, so hearing no objections, we will go ahead and schedule our next meeting, our November 15 meeting via Zoom. You will be hearing from us with a formal agenda for that meeting, and we hope to see you via Zoom in a couple more weeks. So with that, any last comments from anybody? All right. Well, thank you all very much. Again, thank you to our presenters and to all of you for your continued engagement and participation. And just a virtual round of applause to everybody for all the hard work that everybody has put into this document. Again, I'm very excited We're in the final stretch of getting this approved, so looking forward to our final steps in the coming meetings. Thank you, everybody, so much, and have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the speakers.
Thanks, everybody.
Muchas gracias. Buenas noches a todos.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.